Well, it was wet, cold and windy inside the Stade de France for the final of the 2023 Rugby World Cup, and in this video I'm going to review that game. G'day and welcome to Inside Rugby with Mark. I'm a Kiwi rugby fan living here in beautiful Cancun in Mexico. And in this video I'm going to be talking about that epic final that was the Rugby World Cup final for 2023. Now, before this game got underway, there'd been a lot of pundits, myself included, talking about the tipping scales of which way this game could go. And I think we all agreed on one thing, and that was that it was going to be a very close game. And it was going to come down to those margins that we had talked about for the last 7 weeks across the Rugby World Cup. We're going to talk about pressure, we're going to talk about discipline. We're going to talk about who can handle the moment in itself and who can do that better. And then we're going to talk about the benches, and those were the main things that we all thought were going to make a difference in this year's Rugby World Cup final. Wayne Barnes was in charge of this game. For many that was a good thing, for a few it wasn't. He'd been 17 years in the game, Wayne Barnes, 112 test matches, a fantastic career, neither whichever way you look at it. A great representation of the world of rugby, and it was down to the players now and for them to be able to do what they had to do in this grand final. Now, what I'm going to do in this video is look at each 20-minute segment of the game, break it down, have a look at who I think won that 20 minutes and what were the key happenings within that time frame that either made this game go one way or the other. So let's get into it and start off with the first 20 minutes of the epic final between the New Zealand All Blacks and the South African Springboks. So the All Blacks showed their intent in that first minute just by opening the ball up a little bit, and despite the conditions, they were going to throw it wide whenever they could to try and put some pressure on South Africa. But we didn't have to wait long, did we, for our biggest fears to come to fruition. We all said before the game we didn't want any injuries and we didn't want any cards. And in the third minute, unfortunately, Bonami was found at the bottom of a ruck. Shannon Frizzell had gone in and trapped his body down and was given a yellow card. So within 3 minutes of the final, New Zealand were down to 14 men, and Shannon Frizzell found himself sitting very lonely on the bench waiting to see his verdict, whether he was going to come back on the field or not. So that immediately gave South Africa a penalty kicking opportunity. Andre Pollard stepped up and South Africa went ahead 3-0 just after a few minutes in this game. And it was a real shame from two sides for that particular point of play. The first one, it was terrible to see Bonami go down and get injured and have to be going off the field as in the very beginning of this Rugby World Cup final. Nobody wants to see that. And it was bad news for Shannon Frizzell and for the All Blacks when they lost a man so early in the game. And of course it was going to disrupt their pattern. So after 3 minutes play, South Africa 3, New Zealand 0, and on we went. So with Bonami having to be replaced early in this game, it would have thrown a little bit of chaos into the South African strategic bench use. Dion Fourie came on to cover for Bonami. But it also would have thrown some chaos into the All Black camp going down to 14 men. And, you know, we talk many times about how teams plan for these occasions, but it's never the same on game day, is it, when all this pressure is on and such high stakes as it is in a Rugby World Cup final. So it was going to really test the All Blacks' mettle on how they were going to be able to handle the pressure of this game. Now, the game went on and it became a little bit of a kicking competition for a while, for a few minutes. Andre Pollard, I thought, got the better of that kicking exchange. He was more thorough with his kicks, and the All Blacks didn't look so good under those contestable balls. And I thought this was going to be an area where South Africa could put the pressure on the All Blacks early in this game. And it was inside that first 10 minutes that we saw the Springboks getting a little bit of domination when it came to that kicking. We saw around the 10th minute mark, Pollard put through a clever little kick for Colby to chase onto, and it turned the All Blacks around and gave them something different to think about from a defensive point of view. So I thought this was a good ploy from the Springboks. It was going to keep the All Blacks on their toes, and it was also going to give South Africa some territory, which was going to be pivotal, I thought, in these particular conditions. So it was a good start from the Springboks, just playing that kicking game, putting contestables up, It didn't look like the All Blacks were overly comfortable under that high ball, but when they also put ball through the ground through kicks, it was also having an impact. So a good start from the Springboks. So just before Shannon Frizzell came back onto the field, his card was kept at a yellow. South Africa got another penalty opportunity, and Andre Pollard kicked the goal no problem at all. So it was 6 points to 0 to South Africa after 12 minutes. Shannon Frizzell had come back on the field. The All Blacks were back to 15 men, and they would have been fairly happy, I think, only losing 6 points during that time that Shannon Frizzell was off the field. So now it was a time for the All Blacks to try and rebuild, get back into this game, and try and get some rustle some of the momentum away from the Springboks that they were building in that first 12 or 15 minutes of this game. And it was around that 15-minute mark that the All Blacks went down onto attack, and they got very close to the South African line, and the ball came out to Geordie Barrett. He put a really clever little kick over the top, and it bounced just short of the Springbok line. Ardie Savea was there waiting for the bounce to gather the ball and go over and score a try, but the ball didn't bounce in favour of Ardie Savea. The South Africans were able to clean it up and stop that attacking move from the All Blacks. So the first real opportunity for the All Blacks to score a try in this game came from that little chip kick from Geordie Barrett, and unfortunately the bounce of the ball didn't go the way for the All Blacks on that occasion. 1 minute later though, the All Blacks still down on the attack, and they got a penalty against, or the South Africans got a penalty against them. Richie Mo'unga stood up for his first kick of the day and was successful. So the All Blacks on the scoreboard were back to 6 points to 3, and it was absolutely game on at that stage. 2 minutes later, 18 minutes into the game and nearly at the end of the first quarter, and Wayne Barnes was looking specifically at a few things in this game. The first one was the clear out area and making sure that no players were disrupting the clear out of either team. And the All Blacks got pinned, in particular Ardie Savea got pinned in the 18th minute for not clearing out correctly, and a penalty was given to South Africa. Andre Pollard stepped up again, and no mistake from the man. He kicked the Springboks clear. They went out to 9 points to 3 after 18 minutes of the game. So we got to the end of the first 20 minutes of this game, and I'm going to give it to South Africa. They're on the lead in the scoreboard, 9 points to 3, but there were some other things that were going quite well for South Africa. Peter Steph du Toit was showing himself in this game, and he was being already very impressive when it came to tackling and that defensive line, and he was really the architect, I thought, of the Springboks pushing up, getting line speed against the All Blacks. And when the All Blacks did try to move the ball, that South African line defence was up in their face and causing them some problems. So Peter Steph du Toit was standing out for me in that first few minutes of the game. Damien Willemse was good at the back as well. He did a couple of things in that first 20 minutes that gave me a feeling that he knew what he was doing and playing well in these particular conditions. And also Andre Pollard, not only did he kick the goals, but he was also kicking well in open play and putting the All Blacks under pressure by turning them around. So I thought those things were coming good for the Springboks. The All Blacks weren't really in the game in that first 20 minutes. They were finding it hard to get a rhythm. They weren't really working out the conditions and how to play in those particular conditions. The ball was obviously slippery, and they were just having trouble putting it through hand. So when we did see a few occasions when the All Blacks put it through their back line, the passes were going behind the man, or the man was having to be extra careful with his handling because the conditions were quite difficult. And I just thought South Africa were playing better at this stage of the game according to the actual conditions. Also in that first 20 minutes, the All Blacks line-out wasn't firing, and they got a few balls interrupted by the South Africans, and that gave South Africans opportunity to control possession, which was also being a big factor in that first 20 minutes. Shannon Frizzell, of course, spent 10 minutes of that first 20 minutes off the field. That didn't help the All Blacks at all. They didn't get a chance to really consolidate their platform getting into this game. And as we said in the very beginning, for both teams' point of view, whoever started off this game well and got some momentum was probably going to go on and take the momentum throughout this game. And that's what I felt happened in that first 20 minutes. So for the next few minutes, it was a bit of an arm wrestle as both teams were just getting a bit of possession and trying to move their respective teams down the field. I thought the All Blacks were just starting to get a little bit more into the game. But then on the 28th minute, we got a pivotal moment in this game, in this entire final. And that's when Sam Cane was interjected from the game because of a high tackle on Jesse Creel. And very, very unfortunate situation. The TMO got involved, of course, and made this highlight aware to Wayne Barnes, or highlighted this particular tackle to Wayne Barnes. They looked at it and they decided that Sam Cane had to leave the field. There was some immediate concerns that the yellow card might go to a red card, but as we know, the bunker system has 8 minutes to decide whether or not the card is going to be upgraded. So everybody on the All Black side was waiting nervously to find out whether or not Sam Cane's infringement was going to be further penalised. Okay, you can say whatever you want about referees and the TMO in this year's Rugby World Cup, but I've been saying right from the very beginning that the teams have to look out for their discipline. And it's been a standard process, hasn't it, throughout the Rugby World Cup, that anything up around the head area is going to be problematic, and that players need to be very, very aware of it. So coming into this final, I thought the All Blacks' discipline was one of those things that had a question mark over it. And within the first 30 minutes of the game, we'd seen 2 cards to the All Blacks, 1 yellow to Shannon Frizzell and that yellow card to Sam Cane in the 28th minute. So this was going to be a very important part of this final, no way that how you looked at it. And spending 20 minutes off the field with 2 players in the first 30 minutes was not the way the All Blacks were going to win this game. And then a couple of minutes after that, the Springboks got another kickable penalty opportunity in the 33rd minute. Andre Pollard stepped up and got that. The Springboks went out to 12 points to 3. The All Blacks were down to 14 men. And it was looking like it wasn't going to be the day in the office for the All Blacks. It's just those small momentum swings, isn't it, in these big games that really, really make a difference. And the All Blacks were under the cosh with the pressure that the Springboks were putting on them. And then just after that penalty kick from Andre Pollard, the news came through from the bunker that Sam Cane's card, yellow card, had been upgraded to red, that he wouldn't be coming back in off the bench, and that he was going to be the first player in the history of the Rugby World Cup to be expelled from the final and to be given a red card. Not the level of kudos that Sam Cane or the All Blacks wanted from this game, being now recognised as the first person to be expelled from a Rugby World Cup final is something that he's got to live with for the rest of his life. And it's a bit of a hard one to take, isn't it, in a situation like this where all players are trying to do their very, very best and not trying to go out there maliciously and trying to take someone out of the game. So a very unfortunate situation for Sam Cane, something that he's going to have many, many years to reflect on, and something at the end of the day that was very instrumental in the outcome of this particular game. Now at this stage we just had a few minutes to go before half time. It was going to be really important that the All Blacks pulled themselves together. Adi Savea took over the role of captain in the game, and it was going to be his job to try and get the All Blacks focused and back into this game. So those few minutes leading up to half time were going to be really, really critical, I thought, in terms of whether the All Blacks could put some points on the board, and they went searching for that in those last 5 minutes of the first half, and they were fortunate to get a penalty opportunity, and Richie Mo'unga stood up and kicked that in the 38th minute, bringing the All Blacks back to 12 points to 6. Then we honed in on half time, and there was not to be any more scores in the first half, so 12-6 it would be at half time. That second 20 minutes of the first half, the scoreboard read 3 points all, but the All Blacks lost Sam Cane for the rest of the game, so I thought that was a big moment indeed. On top of that, the All Blacks had only won 5 out of 11 lineouts. They were having trouble in the lineouts, and they needed to do something with that. So I'm sure at half time, Ian Foster, Jason Ryan and Joe Schmidt would have been sitting down talking with the leaders of the group about how they were going to fix the lineout problem, because they weren't getting any clean ball from that. And having possession in this game was going to be vitally important. The conditions were playing such that whenever you had ball in hand or you're controlling the territory, it was going to be very, very important in this game. So in the first half, as I said, we saw some standout players for South Africa. I thought Sia Khaleesi started off extremely well for his team. He was leading them around the pitch very well. But it was that man, Peter Steph-du-Toit, who was doing some very, very big things, particularly in defence for the Springboks, and he was having a big impact on this game. He caught down Geordie Barrett a couple of times in very impressive tackles in that first half, and I thought he was really, really leading the way as well. Kurtley Arenze was also looking very dangerous on the wing. There was a couple of opportunities under the high ball for him, and if the bounce had gone either way, he could have been away. And Cheslin Colby started off really well. So I'd spoken about these guys in my preview of the game, thinking they were going to be very dangerous, and they were as well. The other thing I noticed in that first half is that Jesse Kriel and Damien Dealandi were in this game. Unlike the game against England last week, we didn't see too much of them in this game, but in the first half, both Kriel and Dealandi were very big in terms of just taking that ball up for a few metres and getting some turn back ball for the South Africans. I thought the scrums were pretty even in the beginning. I didn't see any big advantage to the All Blacks once Bonami went off. But it was critical that the scrums were being held up high, and that's one thing that Wayne Barnes was focused on during his refereeing tenure in that first half. He was making sure there was a lot of height in the scrum, and that both packs were pushing towards each other and not spinning the scrum around. So we had pretty decent scrums, I thought, in the first half of the game. Faf de Klerk had a good first half. He did some good box kicks that put the All Blacks under a bit of pressure, and that was an area as well I thought the All Blacks were letting themselves down a little bit. The contestable kicks, either they didn't catch them or there was some confusion about how they were going to clear the ball out. So despite the score for that second 20 minutes being 3-all on the scoreboard, I gave it to South Africa because one, they kept all their players on the field, and secondly, they were just able to withstand any pressure that the All Blacks were trying to mount on them. But there did seem to be opportunities, particularly in that last 5 or 6 minutes of the first half, where the All Blacks might be able to get back into this game. The question was going to be whether they could do it with 14 men and keep that effort sustainable over the following 40 minutes of the game, particularly with the South African bomb squad coming on and increasing the energy level as we went into this remaining 40 minutes of the final. So we got underway in the period of play after half-time, that 40 to 60 minute period of play, and it was full on, wasn't it, straight away. The All Blacks were trying to impress as much as they could. The contestable kicks were still being an issue as the high ball went up. They were a bit of a lottery, and this was taking a little bit of the momentum out of the game because no one really knew what was going to happen when these kicks were taken up. But then on the 45th minute, we had another massive moment in this game, and it was, yes, surrounding another card, and it was this time the South African captain, Siya Kolisi, was given a yellow card, and he was marched off the field in the 45th minute of the game. What a remarkable situation where we have both captains of the two Rugby World Cup final teams out on the bench at the same time. An incredible moment, and we're all going to be waiting very anxiously to see whether or not Kolisi's yellow card was going to be upgraded to a red card, because it looked very similar to what happened to Sam Cane. And it was at this stage of the game where I thought that, you know, our biggest fears were being realised. We were seeing this game affected by cards and by the TMO, and no matter what side you sit on, that's the last thing that we wanted to see. So when Kolisi went off, I was shaking my head. I was worried for the game itself, because already with Frizzell's and Kane's and now Kolisi's card, it was having an impact on this game and this final, this Rugby World Cup final, where these two amazing teams had fought their way through to get to this stage of the tournament. They didn't deserve to have the game impacted in this particular way. That's just my own personal opinion, and that's completely irrelevant to what the outcome of this game was. And this was in the 45th minute when Kolisi went off. I shook my head and I just said, we don't want this to happen in the pinnacle game of the Rugby World Cup. Anyway, it did happen. We had to live with it, and the game went on. We were down to 14 men on each side at this stage, and it was an opportunity to see whether the All Blacks could get back into this game. 51 minutes into the game, two things happened that we took note of. The first one was that Siya Kolisi's yellow card was not upgraded to a red card, so he would be coming back on the field. So we also saw Jacques Nienaber and Rassie Erasmus empty some of the bomb squad onto the field at that stage, and we saw Kwagga Smith come on, we saw Archie Schneemann come on, and we also saw Jean Klein come on at that stage. So there were big changes for the South African. In that early 50-minute period of the game, it was the All Blacks that went on to the ascendancy. They attacked down the right-hand side. Then the ball came out from a maul and went right out to the left. Moanga drew a beautiful pass for Aaron Smith, who went through to score a try. that was a few minutes later disallowed, and that was going to be a huge moment in the game. It was the first time that the South African line was crossed, and it was a big moment for the All Blacks as they thought they'd got across for that big try. Once again, the TMO got involved. We went through a whole lot of deliberations. We saw that the ball was knocked on from Adi Savir in the insinuating maul situation. So the ball, by the time it got out to Mo'unga and then on to Smith for the try, it was irrelevant. The try was going to be disallowed, and we were back into general play again. So that was a really big moment in this game. I thought the All Blacks were starting to get a little bit of ascendancy and putting the South Africans under pressure close to their own line. But we didn't have to wait too long for something outstanding to happen again, and this time it was the All Blacks on attack once again, and it was that man Mark Philpott who'd been playing really well in this game, and I hadn't mentioned him up until now, and I should have done, because each time he got the ball he made some really probing runs that got through the South African defence on the inside. He got the ball back for good second and quick third phase play for the All Blacks, and he was playing an absolute stonker of a game, I thought, and it was Mark Philpott that made the break to set up this amazing try for the All Blacks. So he went right through the middle, got the ball back. Bodie Barrett went over for the try after picking the ball up off the ground on the left hand side of the field. He slid over in the corner for the All Blacks, and the All Blacks ended up redeeming themselves for the previous knock on and got over for a try in the 57th minute of the game. So a huge moment in the game with the All Blacks scoring the try, getting back to 12 points to 11 in the 57th minute with a kick to come. And you know what? I thought just for a minute, this kick is very important in this game. We still have over 20 minutes to go, but this was going to be a tight affair, and I thought every point was going to count. And I asked myself the question, why is Richie Mo'unga taking this kick? It was out very wide. It was on the right-hand side of the field, the left-hand side of the field, which was good for a right-footed kicker. And I thought Jordie Barrett should have stepped up and had a go at this particular conversion. Heavy conditions, a long way out on the touchline. It was a kick made for Jordie Barrett, but Richie Mo'unga had a go at it, and he unfortunately missed it. So those 2 points, which were going to be very critical in this game, I thought probably went missing from the All Blacks at that stage. But we had a game on. It was 12 points to 11. The All Blacks took that opportunity to put pressure on the Springboks and start to build some momentum, and they were able to score that fantastic try out wide to Beauden Barrett. So we got to the end of the 60-minute mark, and for that 20 minutes between half-time and 60 minutes, I gave that to the All Blacks both on the scoreboard, and I thought they were starting to create some ascendancy in going forward, and a couple of their runs were looking dangerous, and they were looking as though they were going to be able to get not only over the gain line, but they were going to be able to put pressure on the South African defensive, and we're pretty much getting set for what was going to be a very dramatic last 20 minutes of this game. So for the next few minutes leading up to 65th minute, it was a bit of an arm wrestle again. It was a couple of those high balls put up, the ball bounced and went on either side. There was no real clarity around who was getting possession from those balls, so it was a bit of a mess. And then on the 65th minute, we saw what I thought was a very instrumental part of this game yet again, and that was the All Blacks calling out their bench to come on. So we saw the front row change for the All Blacks. We saw Tamati Williams coming on. We also saw Taki Hoho coming on for the All Blacks. And I thought this was going to be a very distinctive move to see whether or not the whole notion of the bomb squad was going to be able to make the difference against this All Black team. The other thing that happened that really surprised me in the 65th minute was Aaron Smith was taken off for the All Blacks and Finlay Christie was put on. And I couldn't for the life of me understand why this was happening. Smith was having a really good game. He's a great leader to have on the field at this stage of a game, a very tense game, 20 minutes to go, a lot of pressure on, World Cup rugby final, and Finlay Christie comes on. I just can't get my head around it, and I don't know why Ian Foster decided to take Aaron Smith off at that particular point in the game. Willie Leroux had come on for the Springboks, and as we know, he was their only back reserve in this game, so he came on around about the 67th minute, and he did a very clever thing when he came on and got possession of the ball. He put a kick across the field, right back, sweeping down into the All Black territory, and we could see that South Africa was starting to play for territory in the remaining minutes of this game. They didn't want the All Blacks to have an opportunity back up in their own half to maybe get a penalty and a kick for goal. or to get a line break and to try and get out for a try. So LaRue was really instrumental in pushing the All Blacks back at that stage of the game, trying to keep the All Blacks back in their own territory, and it was going to be a game of attrition now until the finish line. So then we headed into the last 10 minutes of the game, and the All Blacks were on an attacking move. The ball came out to Anton Leonard-Brown. He went to pass the ball. Cheslin Kolbe stuck out his big mitt and did a deliberate knock on, which was referred from the TMO to Wayne Barnes. And once again, we saw another card in this year's Rugby World Cup final. Cheslin Kolbe went off the field, sat down on the seat, put his head in his hands, and basically couldn't watch the play because he thought at that stage he might have cost his team the Rugby World Cup final. What a dramatic play once again for a yellow card situation in this year's Rugby World Cup final. So there it was, the All Blacks had got that opportunity on attack again, and we went into the last 8 minutes of this game really not knowing what the outcome was going to be. So here was the opportunity for the All Blacks from Kolbe's indiscretion. They were 49 metres out, it was pouring down with rain, it was terribly heavy conditions, but Geordie Barrett stepped up and tried to have a penalty kick at goal for the All Blacks to put them in the lead with just 8 minutes to go. Unfortunately, the kick just sailed left of the uprights, and although he had the distance, that was for sure, it wasn't accurate, and the All Blacks slipped out of that opportunity to go into the lead in the last few minutes of the game. 74 minutes in, and Ian Foster decided it was time for Richie Mo'unga to come off and Damien McKenzie to come on, the guy that could perhaps break open the game for the All Blacks, score a try from anywhere. And it was all starting to smell a little bit of desperation at this stage with just 6 minutes to go on the clock, and the All Blacks really not having the opportunities to get through the South African defensive line, which I must say was absolutely immense, being led by that man, Peter Steph du Toit. And even though the teams were down to 14 men each at this stage, it was a real arm wrestle in terms of who was trying to get control. Each time each team got the ball, they looked like they were going to make a break, and then something fell over where the opposition ended up getting the ball. The All Blacks had sorted out their line-out in the second half, and were also picking off the South African line-out. Dion Foree was having all sorts of nightmares when it came to his line-out throw-in, and the All Blacks were consistently taking the line-outs from South Africa in the second half, so they did turn that around from the first half, that's for sure. Then we got to the 77th minute of this game. The Springboks were down in the All Blacks 22 on attack. The All Blacks cleared the ball. It came out to Finlay Christie, and as if the rugby gods had answered my question, he got a clearing kick charged down from the South Africans that nearly led to an impressive try to the South Africans. So once again, Finlay Christie too slow at the break of the base of the maul and got caught with his clearing kick. Would that have ever happened to Aaron Smith? I don't think so. And yeah, just a head explosion again for me why Finlay Christie was on the field with 15 minutes to go after. So the All Blacks were able to break out of their own territory and get down towards the halfway line again, just with 2 minutes to go in this game. And were we going to see another one of those epic finales to an amazing Rugby World Cup game? It was in the lap of the gods, wasn't it? And we got down towards the halfway, there was a scrum ensuing, and the South Africans were given the feed to the scrum. Now what happened on this particular scrum was Adi Savir had gone up to Wayne Barnes and said, listen mate, we're going to put everything into this and we're going to try and push South Africa off the ball. They were looking for a penalty, the All Blacks, so they could snatch this game in the last minute. Now unfortunately, when the scrum went down the first time, Wayne Barnes decided to reset the scrum. It took a lot of time off the clock, and before we knew it, we only had 20 seconds left in this game. So the Springboks, all they had to do was to try and secure possession from this particular scrum. The ball was put in by Faf de Klerk, and the All Blacks put on in a massive shove to try and push the South Africans off the ball. The scrum turned into a real mess. Somebody in the Springboks team picked the ball up and started running upfield towards the halfway line. The All Blacks got them, tried to tear them down into a maul, but Wayne Barnes decided at that stage that was it. We had enough. We've had enough yellow cards, we've had enough red cards, we've had enough drama in this Rugby World Cup. It's all over, and South Africa have won. Okay, so let's get on to summarising this game. Now first of all, the last 20 minutes of the game, I'm giving it to the All Blacks. They came back into the game, they gave themselves an opportunity to win that game in the last few minutes, and they just weren't able to do it, but I'm still giving them that last 20 minutes of the game. Overall, South Africa were fantastic. They were absolutely good under pressure, and as I talked about in many of my videos leading up to this year's Rugby World Cup finals, the things that were going to be questionable on the All Blacks side of the things came to fruition in this game. Discipline, pressure, and even though they played really well, I thought the All Blacks, there were opportunities there that went missing just through those critical moments of pressure, and they weren't able to put it together, and that's what ended up winning this game for South Africa. They were better under pressure, and their line defence and their overall defensive play was better in this game, I thought, and that's what brought the South Africans out on top. I can't let it go about the card situation for both teams. I think it was a travesty to the Rugby World Cup final of us having this situation with all the players that went off, no matter what side they represented. That's not what we want to see in Rugby World Cup finals. I think that's something World Rugby need to sit down and have a really good look at as we get prepared now for the next 4 years leading into Australia. Something's got to be done about it. The impact the TMO and the referees are having on these games with card situations is ruining the game, no matter whether it was a World Cup final or whether it was some of the other games we've seen in this year's competition. South Africa made 209 tackles in this game compared to the New Zealand's 93, so a massive defensive display from the South Africans. So that in itself is mighty and deserved of champions of this game, and at the end of the day, the South Africans have won their last 3 games in this year's Rugby World Cup by 1 point, and that just shows how good they are at playing under pressure. And maybe the All Blacks having that easier run into this final was something that played against them. They weren't given those huge pressurised opportunities to play, except for that game against Ireland where they did very well. But the South Africans had to face it week in, week out, and I think that's what brought them out on top. So that game against France, that game against England, and now being put under the cosh by the All Blacks in the final, the South Africans just had the mettle at the end of the game, and it was up here that they were able to win it. So well done to everybody watching who's affected by the South African team in some way. And I say affected because this South African team is changing lives. It's changing hope and glory back in South Africa, there's no doubt about it. And in Siya Kolisi and Peter Steph du Toit in this particular game, you got 2 leaders that were absolutely outstanding for your country. We've got to acknowledge a couple of other things as well. The Andre Pollard situation was a real thing. He did come into this year's Rugby World Cup. He did make a difference, and it was his cool head at a lot of the big times throughout this Rugby World Cup in the knockout stages that won this for South Africa. I thought Faf de Klerk was also really good today, but the Springboks across the field, they were all in there with their heart and their soul. From Damian Willemse at the fullback position to the 2 wings who had a really good game, even though Cheslin Colby got caught out for that yellow card. I thought they played really well. Kriel and Zealander, they were good throughout this year's Rugby World Cup, and they were able to keep South Africa absolutely solid in the centres, both on attack and in defence. And Jesse Kriel's stock with me has gone up substantially throughout this year's Rugby World Cup. I thought he had a thrilling Rugby World Cup and Rugby World Cup final as well. But it was the Springboks forwards. They were able to rely on each other. They were able to get up for each other, and they put it on the line when it really counted. And whether or not it was Peter Steph du Toit or Franco Mostad or Ebden Edzebeth, they all played a role in this win for South Africa. And it was a team that came together in search of glory to win their 2nd Rugby World Cup in a row. And that's exactly what they achieved against this very valiant, very gladiatorial All Black team who never gave up until the last few minutes. And hats off to the All Blacks as well. It was just a kilometre too far for them, and some of those things that have been their nemesis for the last few years came back into play. Discipline and pressure when it really counted. They weren't there to be able to get across the finish line. Another big stat to come out of the game: 7 turnovers to South Africa, 1 to the All Blacks, and I think that was a telling moment as well. When the All Blacks had to get the ball, they weren't able to do it, and the Springboks were able to protect the ball. And on a day like there was, with a lot of rain and heavy conditions, having the ball in possession was always going to be a very big factor, and I think the Springboks did that extremely well as well. So it was an epic final. It was full of drama, and someone like Sam Cane doesn't deserve to be living now for the rest of his life with this legacy of being the first rugby player to be sent off in a Rugby World Cup final, and also as the captain of his nation, leading himself. That's a pretty cruel way to end the Rugby World Cup. Sam Cane is not a malicious player at all. He was doing his very best for his team, and it was one of those situations, wrong place, wrong time, as it was perhaps for Sia Khaleesi and Cheslin Colby as well. So again, I'm focusing on cards on both sides. I think it's something we need to look at as the spectacle for these Rugby World Cups going ahead in the future. So there we go, that's the end of the 2023 Rugby World Cup as far as the games go. I'm going to be making some more videos, and as I said, some interviews with people talking about this year's competition, so make sure you stick around for that. Plenty of really interesting stuff coming down the pipeline for the Rugby World Cup 2023. As I said, I'm going to be following a lot of other rugby championships now as we move forward, giving my in-depth analysis and opinion right here on Inside Rugby with Mark, and I'd love to have you around for that journey. So hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and tell me what you've thought of this year's Rugby World Cup. Have you enjoyed it all the way through, and what do you think World Rugby can do to improve the spectacle in 2027 down in Australia? Okay, I'll be back again really soon. Until then, stay well, stay safe everybody. Enjoy your victory if you're a winner today, and also appreciate and respect the other team as well. They did a great job in playing their role in this year's Rugby World Cup final. Until next time, I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.